Happy Pride!
Be who you are for your pride.
It's still June, right, when this video is posted? I really hope it is. As you may have noticed from some of my latest uploads, I've been exercising the linguistics side of my brain a little bit more over here. Sociolinguistics specifically has always been so fascinating to me. I took all the courses available to me in college, and sociolinguistics even inspired my final thesis, which I did make an abridged version of over here on this channel. It's my Bridgerton and language social hierarchy one, and actually I've kind of been contemplating redoing that video, even though it's not that old. I think my editing has gotten a lot better since then, so let me know if you'd be interested in an updated version of that. Also, if I sound slightly nasally or congested, that's because I am. I don't know who gets a cold in June, but I guess I get colds in June. So I've been dealing with a little bit of that, but my voice finally feels well enough to speak, thankfully, so I can record this. I hope it's not too annoying or obnoxious for you. But anyways, back to Pride. Yay! Happy birthday to all the gay people out there. I can't believe you were all born in the same month. Like, wow, that is crazy. This is such a stupid joke. Welcome to Salted Latte, a place where I like to dissect and explore popular language and prose. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I'd love it if you liked and most importantly subscribed, because I'm getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers, and once I hit that goal, I can finally get monetized. As much as this month is about celebration, it's also a great opportunity for education, and so I thought I'd take you along with me on my journey of learning more about the deep history of queer culture through the lens of language. Because you might not realize just how many words and phrases that we use as fun internet slang are actually rooted in the gay community. And I'm not just referring to the modern day gay community, I mean entire oral languages and traditions that have been passed down through generations by queer and trans people starting all the way back in the 1800s. So let's begin there, in the mid-19th century, with the Polari language, which is a name you might not recognize, though I promise you are familiar with some of the words and phrases it contains. Polari is a type of slang, and the term Polari comes from the Italian parlare and French parler, which both mean to talk. While we don't know exactly where the term originated from, we can see it referenced as far back as the 19th century, like I was just saying. Back then, it was popular in the United Kingdom among groups like circus entertainers, merchants, beggars, and prostitutes, and sailors as well. Since the primary users of Polari were often of lower class, it's influenced by a lot of other UK working class dialects like Cockney, as well as a lot of Mediterranean sailor speech, Romani, and Yiddish vocabulary. What began as a handful of words soon grew into hundreds over the 19th and into the 20th century across those groups that I just mentioned, as well as the gay subculture. Some of these words you might recognize as still popular today, like trade, which we will get into a little bit more later on. The peak of the expansion and popularity of Polari happened around the 1950s and 1960s, coinciding with a rise in repressive laws and anti-queer prejudice. Just a lot of discourse, which often led, unfortunately, to violence about the existence of queer people, not whether or not they existed, but whether or not they deserve to exist. You might have heard of this time referred to as the Lavender Scare or the Second Red Scare, and those terms both relate primarily to the political and social climates of the US during roughly the 40s through the 60s. But this so-called moral panic related to the gay community was not unique to the US. A lot of that rhetoric was also spreading to other countries such as the UK, the home of Polari. Thus, Polari transitioned from slang to a coded language that could allow queer individuals to converse amongst themselves publicly while staying protected from ridicule, being outed, hate crimes, or even imprisonment. Because of the political volatility at this time, many queer people had to be very careful about who they trusted and how they presented themselves. During this time, you might present as stereotypically straight, but through the strategic use of Polari, you could still maintain your authentic identity and find community. One of the articles I read in preparation for this video, called Lavender Linguistics from The Guardian, has a good example of how Polari would be integrated into everyday conversation as sort of a litmus test. The man interviewed, John Foster, who spoke Polari nearly every single day for years during the 1950s, says, quote, "I always looked straight, so dropping in the odd Polari word would be a way of checking the other person out. If you liked the look of someone at the theater, you might say to them, 'That was a bona, good scene, wasn't it?' If they were straight, they wouldn't pick up on it, but if they were gay, there might be a shriek of recognition." She's camp, this one. Camp being another word for funny or flamboyant. Nearing the end of the 60s, the usage of Polari began to decline for a couple of reasons. Most notably, the decriminalization of same-sex marriage in England and Wales was passed in 1967. Canada followed suit in 1969, decriminalizing most same-sex activity. And while the United States didn't officially legalize gay marriage until 2015, the Stonewall riots happened in 1969, which sparked the gay rights movement in America. And if you've ever heard the phrase, "the first Pride was a riot," that's because the first Pride parade in America took place in 1970 to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Another reason Polari began phasing out is that straight people were starting to catch on. Polari's roots in Cockney and other European languages helped it to blend in amongst regular everyday speech. Words like aqua, which means water, and omi, which has meanings in multiple different European languages, weren't that strange to hear in two people's conversation. But a show called Round the Home, which ran in the late 1960s, changed that when they featured two puppets named Julian and Sandy, which were played by two gay men. These puppets used Polari frequently in the show, which was broadcast to millions of people, making these terms much more public knowledge. Now in 2026, you can purchase physical dictionaries of Polari, or you can visit websites which serve as online dictionaries for many of these words, which is what I referenced for this video. I'll link the one that I use down below along with all my other sources, just like I did with my last sort of etymology video. But it was just so interesting to sit there and scroll through all of the words and definitions. There's so many, and I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to remember all these different words and their meanings, considering that for most of the language's existence, Polari had to exist as an oral language only. I personally didn't recognize most of the words, but there were a few that I did, and a few that you probably will too. Several Polari words have made their way into popular slang and internet culture, like fruity and trade, for example. In Polari, fruit is used to reference a gay man. It's usually in a derogatory sense, and it's likely that the term fruity came from the phrase nutty as a fruit cake. And I found this lovely TikTok by Rainbow History Class that provides great insight into the relationship to fruity and queer culture, which I'll insert a clip of here.
Why are gay people described as fruity? This term, like many others to describe LGBTQ+ people, has its roots in a slur. Its origin may begin with the fruitcake, a delicacy eaten by Europeans for thousands of years that mainly comprises of fruits and a lot of dried nuts. Nuts was a word that has been used since the 1800s to describe a person who's mentally unwell, odd, or eccentric. So because of this, an old saying, nutty as a fruitcake, became popular in the early 20th century. During this time, homosexuality was seen as a mental illness, so gay people were described as nutty as a fruitcake, which became fruity for short. But the queer community have often found a way to reclaim the derogatory terms thrown at them. So British gay men adopted the word fruit to describe themselves when speaking Polari, the secret gay language they used to avoid arrest. Today, the word fruity can be rather dicey. For some, it's a fun and flamboyant term to describe their identity, while for others it harks back to a time where they were seen as nuts, which is hurtful not just to them, but to people who experience mental illness too.
Why fruit? The answer is quite simple, actually. Humans love to unnecessarily gender everything, even food. High-protein, animal-derived foods like steaks or burgers are usually seen as more rugged and masculine, while something like a bowl of strawberries or blueberries are sweet and feminine. Calling someone fruity was yet another way to perform and enforce gender norms, specifically related to masculinity, gay men, and how people chose to express their gender identity. And just like the term queer, many members of the community have chosen to reclaim fruity as something more lighthearted amongst each other, but that doesn't mean that everyone in the community has. There are still some people that feel like saying that term is offensive. And just as a slight aside, I do think it's interesting how fruity has trickled into the general public's vocabulary, in particular the straight person's vocabulary, given its history. It's used in a very silly, almost memed way now, and I'm not a gay man and it's not my intention to speak for them here, but I do think the normalization of terms like fruity or trade or other words like them being used by straight people, straight men in particular, I would say, even if it is sort of in a joking kind of way, does have the potential for a bit of positive impact. I mean, not every word is for everyone, I do understand that, but I have noticed that online in particular, whether we realize it or not, we can over-police the mannerisms, tastes, and even the vernacular of men who present us straight. Like the performative male or male manipulator trend that's all about men with their tote bags and painted nails who drink matcha and read their romance books or whatever. And yes, it can be entertaining to poke fun at this to a point, but I do worry sometimes that maybe we are ragging on men a little too much for taking part in more quote-unquote effeminate activities when at the same time we are calling for them to be less rigid in their masculinity and to combat their internalized misogyny. And some men are faking it for likes and views, I'm not gonna deny that, but I do think a lot of them are just living their lives, trying things out, trying to better understand themselves, trying to form an identity and to feel comfortable in that. It's not always performative and it's not always queer baiting if the person is just trying to figure themselves out and most importantly is being respectful about it. Because of course these words were not originally their words to use. Moving on to the word trade, according to the Polari dictionary, trade means a casual intimate partner. There's also several offshoots of this term, including rough trade, which is an overtly masculine intimate partner who has the potential to become aggressive or violent due to their internalized homophobia, and encounters with rough trade can become deadly for the queer individuals involved, both in the past and also still to this day, which I think is important to note. There's also Tootsie trade, which is intimacy between two feminine presenting men, and also a trade curtain, which was a curtain hung between bunks on merchant ships back in the day for privacy during intimate acts. In a situation between two men, the quote-unquote trade would be the partner that is publicly identified as straight or is some way, shape, or form still closeted. In some scenarios, the trade would be of lower class, participating in a form of sex work almost with a wealthier gay man for financial gain. With the help of shows like RuPaul's Drag Race and their quote-unquote trades of the season, the term trade has expanded to reach outside of predominantly queer spaces, and now people use the word to refer to anyone they find attractive. It is still primarily used amongst gay men in particular to describe other men, gay or straight or otherwise, that they find attractive. Another term I'm sure you're all familiar with, mother, can be traced back to Polari language too, but it also has roots in ballroom and drag culture, which we will be getting into next. Ballroom culture can also be known as drag or house culture. No matter which term you choose, they each refer to an underground subculture rooted in the queer community, the Black trans community to be specific. Balls or shows are hosted in which the main event or activity is people modeling, lip syncing, and performing choreographies, quote unquote walking, otherwise known as competing against each other. If you've ever heard the phrase receiving your tens, ballroom culture is where that comes from. Each contestant performs in front of a panel of judges who then score them, usually with number cards. Getting a perfect score from the judges would be the equivalent to receiving your tens. Judges consider aspects like costuming, theatrics, and how convincing of a performance was given. Those with the highest scores continue competing against one another until an ultimate winner is crowned. From what I can find, the origins of ballroom and drag culture in this organized kind of capacity began in the late 1800s. Members of the queer community started hosting these balls as a way to fight back against the many laws popping up directly targeting LGBT+ individuals, such as was the three-piece rule, which criminalized people who wore clothes perceived to be the opposite of their gender. But the interesting thing about this quote-unquote law was that it might have never officially been a law in the first place. Instead, authorities in power like the police were able to harass and arrest queer people, trans people in particular, by abusing technicalities in very old, very unrelated laws. This blatant misuse was allowed to happen all throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s. For example, one of the oldest laws to be misconstrued in this way came out of New York from 1845 that stated it was illegal to, quote, have your face painted, discolored, covered, or concealed while on a road or a public highway. New York passed this originally as a way to stop farmers from disguising themselves as Indigenous Americans in order to avoid paying certain taxes. These types of quote-unquote masquerade laws, as they were referred to, were used to enforce a rigid conservative status quo when it came to gender and sexuality. And the fact that these laws had nothing to do with gender expression didn't stop queer and trans folks from being punished, with police arresting and even rearresting individuals under different charges and trying them under multiple courts until they found one that would mark said person as guilty. The government's enabling of this only encouraged more day-to-day violence toward the queer community as well. While balls and ballroom culture served as a safe place and a reprieve for many white people, this unfortunately wasn't always the case for queer and trans people of color. The time of these clothing laws coincided with the timing of the civil rights movement. So before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a lot of drag balls were still segregated. And even after integration began being implemented, Black participants specifically were put under a lot more scrutiny from white judges and held to different beauty standards. Patterns of unfair treatment led many Black and also Latin groups to host their own balls. One of the most notable and influential individuals to host her own ball would be Crystal LaBea. She and her friend Lottie presented their ball under the house of LaBea in Harlem, New York. This was the first Black hosted ball, which ended up becoming integral for the modern ballroom culture that we know and love today, which we can see influences of from shows like Pose and RuPaul's Drag Race.
Do you think she deserved it?
Darling, she didn't deserve it.
Answer me. You're not speaking from the damn camera. You have a mind. Do you think she deserved it?
You know she didn't deserve it. All of them, the judges knew it too. Because she was terrible. And her explanation for why she wanted the money, to put it in the bank. She's not getting any money because Sabrina is not going to pay her. They're good friends. It's only publicity, and it's bad publicity for Holler and all the rest, because I'm declared as one of the uglier people of the world.
And next time she should drop
And
her
they're not
outfit off
going
at
to
the
rest
cleaners
in New
before she
York,
wears it
darling.
on stage.
She better get the hell back to Philadelphia because she's one of the worst. And where's Miss Sabrina? Because I'll sue the bitch.
Did you sign a release?
No, I didn't sign a release. And if she releases any picture on me, I will sue the fool. She won't make money off of my name, darling. She can make it off of Harlow and all the rest of the fools that will flock to her. But not Crystal, darling. Anybody but her. You can take all the pictures you want of me, but I better not see them on the street because it's over. Get a picture with me and Harlow and we'll see which is more beautiful, darling. The judges didn't have any taste. It was with you that the judges was with, darling. You were in it. It was all week, 2 weeks. Monique told me not to come. That's why Monique is not here in dress, because she's one of the... Monique, darling. Monique was not here as a friend of yours. She's a friend of mine, darling. Monique, would you tell her why you didn't come? Because she knew it's Victor Holler. She said, Crystal, darling, don't go. Because you're not going to get it. And that's why all the true beauties didn't come.
It's in bad taste and you're showing your colors and stuff.
I am doing it bad, but I have a right to show my color, darling. I am beautiful, and I know I'm beautiful.
How about she's showing no collar?
May I say this to you?
Taking the wrong way. Shit, she looked bad. And no way of what you say can do about it.
Ballroom and house culture is where we get terms like mother from. In modern day, the internet uses mother, particularly within online fan culture and stan culture, to refer to their favorite pop stars or actresses they believe to be iconic and at the top of their game. person, or really just any person, usually a woman that is influential and respected from their eyes. Think of someone like Beyonce, or even, an internet creator like Vanilla Mace. Within the queer community, this term has a meaning deeper than idolization. For many, especially for young trans women, having a mother means access to much needed support. Mother means another chance at family for those who have been rejected from their biological relatives. And even for those who are accepted by their loved ones, having a close relationship to someone who intimately understands what you're going through is very important. Mother is an extension of another term, house, which is a way of saying chosen family. Especially during the 50s and 60s, forming a house with fellow queer and trans individuals was a way to maintain community and connection. Oftentimes, people included in a house lived together and were led by a mother and or father who were more experienced in their local queer and ballroom subcultures. Mothers and fathers were and still are instrumental in fostering kinship within the queer community. Ballroom culture, house culture, and terms like mother are especially integral for Black and brown trans women. It gives them the opportunity to meet other queer people of color, and it allows them a safe place to express themselves authentically in a world that has historically been discriminatory and violent toward them. I really like this quote from Liliana Reyes, a Latina trans activist from Michigan. She says, "I had older friends who drove me to these balls when I was young. I saw that these places and the people in it were safe places for LGBTQ people of color. It seems so under the radar and safe for gender expression and being one's true self. The ballroom scene saved my life. Some people think it's simply a club scene, but it is a family scene." And I feel like that really encapsulates the importance of not just these physical spaces existing, but the words and the phrases that are born out of them as well. Another term you might recognize that comes from the ballroom scene is tea, or the tea. This one comes specifically from Black drag culture and is also known as capital T, as in T for truth. One of the first times it was ever used or recorded as written down and being used is in a 1994 book by John Brent titled Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And in this book, he interviewed the Lady Chubliss, a drag queen from Savannah. And she says, "Yeah, my tea, my thing, my business, what's going on in my life," which is in reference to her steering clear from the kind of man who could become aggressive with her after they find out that she's trans. So after they find out her tea. Like this first example, tea can mean truth in reference to your authentic self, your truth. However, we're probably more familiar with its secondary meaning, which is to reveal a hidden truth, also known as to gossip. The 1991 book, One of the Children, an ethnography of identity and gay Black men, includes a quote that exemplifies this usage. It says, quote, "Straight life must be so boring because everyone conforms. These gay kids carry on. They give you dance and great tea." As drag shows and drag culture became more popular with an audience outside of its intended environment, so did the word tea and phrases that use it, such as spill the tea and no tea, no shade. Many other words from Black and brown drag culture in particular have made their way into the internet's lexicon, including serving, the phrase "it's giving blank," and then the phrase "no shade." In fact, it's nearly impossible to separate the Black and brown community and the LGBT community from the impact made on a lot of online speech. They go hand in hand, just like how you can't separate gay rights movements from people of color, because queer people of color, specifically trans people of color, were at the forefront of many foundational attempts at liberation and still play a large role in activism today. I hope that point came across as I was speaking. I'm newer to making more research-based videos, but I am trying my best to keep this an honest and a nuanced conversation. Like I mentioned in my slop etymology deep dive video, I'm not bringing all of this up to try and police who can and cannot say these terms. I don't really think that's my role here. I'm not trans, I'm not a person of color, so to even attempt that would be just out of bounds for me. I just think this is all very interesting and I want to bring light to it. Throughout researching and reading other people's perspectives on the importance of these terms in queer culture, I learned the extent of how their rich meanings are so often diluted once they inevitably reach the general public. And I say inevitably in maybe a hopeful way, because this can signal a trend toward normalizing queer spaces and queer existence. However, it can also just as easily veer into costuming territory. Our collective response depends on our individual responses. Do we approach with curiosity and an open mind, or do we revert back to our ancestors and steal what was never intended to be ours? The sharing of culture is a beautiful thing when it's done with education and when it's done with respect. Otherwise, instead of appreciation, it is appropriation. And to end this off, I'll leave you with a quote by Victor Quinnell Vaughns Jr. from his article in Ebony magazine titled "No Shade, but Please Stop." He says, quote, "This co-opting of language becomes problematic when it is not accompanied by an understanding or an acknowledgement of the culture from which it came. This phenomenon is not unique to ballroom culture. Many Black cultural expressions, from music to fashion to beauty trends, have been appropriated by mainstream culture. However, in the case of Black LGBTQ ballroom culture, this appropriation is particularly poignant because it involves a double marginalization, both racial and sexual. The language that emerged as a lifeline within this community is now being used by those who may not even be aware that these communities exist." I'd love it if you liked and subscribed to the channel. Like I said at the beginning of this video, over here at Salted Latte, I love to dive into and dissect language and prose through all sorts of mediums, anything I'm really interested in at the moment. Let me know if you enjoyed this one. I've been having a lot of fun researching the history behind different words and phrases lately. Next week's video, I'm pretty sure, is going to be a really technical deep dive into the prose of a certain author that is very controversial on the internet. She seems to be beloved by TikTok, but okay, it's Colleen Hoover. I'll tell you, it's Colleen Hoover. I'm going to be analyzing Colleen Hoover's prose, and we're going to be talking about why she writes the way she writes and what that not only says about her as a writer, as an author, but also what it says about readers. So if you're interested in that, stick around. But that's all I have to say for right now. I will talk to you all soon. Goodbye.